I was in a budget review meeting last week. It got tense. A senior manager, a man, was clearly frustrated. His voice got louder. He started cutting people off, and at one point, he firmly slammed his hand on the table, saying, "This is simply not good enough." After the meeting, I overheard two colleagues. "Wow," one said. "He's really passionate about getting this right." An hour later, I was in a different meeting. A female colleague was presenting a project she had poured months into. She was met with a wall of aggressive, nitpicking questions. You could see the frustration building, but she held her composure, her voice only tightening for a moment as she gave a firm, logical defense. After that meeting, I heard one of the same colleagues whisper, "She seemed a bit emotional. I'm not sure she can handle the pressure."
Yeah.
He was passionate. She was emotional. His emotion was seen as strength. Hers was seen as a liability. It's this strange, invisible set of rules, and it got me thinking, what is this invisible hand that decides one person's feeling is a virtue and another's is a weakness?
That invisible hand you're talking about. Yeah, it's incredibly powerful. It's basically a conductor shaped by culture, society, gender, and it dictates who gets to feel what and how it's perceived.
Right.
What you saw. I mean, that complete difference where his anger becomes passion and her controlled frustration is emotional liability. That's textbook. It's exactly how these systemic emotional narratives play out.
So it's not just like a bad day at the office or a biased colleague. It's baked into the system.
Absolutely. It's about deeply ingrained biases around gender and power, dictating how we even see assertiveness.
Which means this goes way beyond just who gets promoted, doesn't it? It feels much more fundamental.
It really does. And that's what we want to unpack in this deep dive. We're tracing those roots. Specifically looking at how culture and gender intersect here. We're examining how that emotional double standard gets embedded, looking at these intersecting cultural, historical, gendered narratives. Often, you don't even see these power dynamics until you look at people navigating, well, two totally different worlds at the same time. So our focus today is really on the lived experience of UK-based South Asian women. Let's call them Salford Daily for brevity. We want to analyze the huge amount of mental, emotional work they do. They're navigating this collectivist culture at home, which often frames female emotionality as a vulnerability, right? But then they're up against the very individualistic framework of Western society, especially in places like therapy or their professional lives.
Wow. Okay, so they're literally caught between two opposing ideas of what emotional health even is.
Exactly. In one world, expressing yourself is key. In the other, control is strength.
That's a massive conflict.
It is. And the core tension, the thing we really need to get our heads around, is this clash. Western individualism versus South Asian collectivism. It's not just different customs. It's like a fundamental disagreement about what it means to be a person.
Okay, so let's define those two frameworks, because how you define self clearly has huge implications for mental health, for therapy, for everything.
Definitely. So Western society, and particularly its psychological models, think about talking therapies, which are dominant here in the UK.
Right.
They're built on individualism.
Right. The I.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It prioritizes the independent self, autonomy, self-focus. Consciousness is organized around the I. The goal of life, and often therapy, is self-development, personal growth, expressing your feelings verbally.
Yeah.
That's seen as the path to being healthy.
You're encouraged to set boundaries, focus on your own needs. That's maturity in that model.
Yes. If you feel it, you should probably talk about it.
Yeah.
Focusing on yourself is healthy. Now, contrast that sharply with the traditional South Asian cultural framework that's largely collectivist.
The we.
Exactly. The priority there is interdependence, maintaining group harmony, strong relationships. The we consciousness, who you are, is defined by your role in the family, the community.
Okay.
So if your behavior, especially uncontrolled emotional expression, rocks the boat, if it burdens the group, that's seen as really negative. It threatens the social fabric, sometimes even the economic stability of the family unit.
So taking that Western idea of self-expression or finding yourself into a collectivist setting, it wouldn't just be seen as weird, it'd be seen as selfish, disruptive.
Potentially even aggressive.
Yeah.
It fundamentally works against a system's goals. It can be framed as a kind of moral failing almost.
Wow.
And this brings us straight to the enormous emotional labor and the barriers on face. Because in that South Asian context, controlling your emotions, hiding difficulties, that's not weakness. Traditionally, it's seen as a sign of maturity, of strength. This emotional self-control is crucial because it means you're not burdening everyone else.
Yeah.
You're preserving harmony. Maybe even the family's reputation is that.
Right, the family honor.
Exactly. And that requirement for containment just clashes fundamentally with the therapeutic goal of opening up, expressing intense feelings verbally.
That's a huge ethical bind for someone in therapy, then. If keeping things bottled is cultural strength, asking them to unpack it feels like asking them to
Whoa.
abandon that strength, maybe even betray their roots.
That's the internal conflict, absolutely.
Yeah.
It can be paralyzing. There's this fear that seeking help, showing pain, makes them look weak, unstable, and maybe confirms those negative stereotypes about women being too emotional.
Yeah.
But here's the paradox we found in the research. Therapy, this Western individualistic space, often became the only place they had for their emotional self. Despite how alien it might have felt, it served as this vital pressure release valve for many.
So even though the model itself felt contradictory to their home life, just having a space that was purely theirs, individually focused, was essential, a lifeline.
Yes, a lifeline. They talked about it in terms of freedom release. One participant, Jasmine, she described therapy as more of an escape from the constant need to suppress feelings in her daily life. It was like a temporary zone where her individual feelings could just exist without impacting the collective.
And another participant, Natsia.
She explicitly called it a pressure release valve.
Why so much pressure needing release? Why couldn't they share some of this pain with, their family, the people closest to them?
Because of that deep-seated sense of responsibility for the collective's well-being, these women often felt directly responsible for shielding their families, parents, siblings, even their own kids from their personal struggles. Ravinder, for instance, she felt she couldn't share her pain with her children because, as she put it, they were grieving themselves. They don't want to know how horrible you're feeling.
Oh, wow.
That's the core of emotional labor in this context, right?
Yeah.
The woman often absorbs the suffering to keep the unit stable. She has to be the strong one, the pillar, even if she's falling apart inside.
That's just heartbreaking, feeling like you have to be the rock, even in your own crisis, because the culture demands it. And that demand for silence, I imagine, is reinforced by a huge cultural stigma around mental health.
Oh, the stigma is pervasive.
Yeah.
It's massive. Seeking outside help, especially for mental health, carries this heavy risk of shame, of damaging the izzat, the family honor. Even just considering therapy can feel like admitting some deep personal or family failure. Natsia, the one who called it a pressure valve, initially she thought therapy was very self-indulgent.
That phrase really captures the collectivist view, doesn't it? Spending time and money just on you feels frivolous when the group has needs.
Exactly. And Ravinder, wanting to keep things quiet, she initially just wanted the quick and silent fix of medication, tablets. She wanted to avoid the talking, the expressing, the whole process that draws attention to the problem and risks cultural disapproval.
They want the issue managed chemically, silently, without having to publicly acknowledge the struggle or, crucially, delve into family dynamics that might be part of the problem.
Precisely. The therapeutic process itself can feel dangerous because it shines a light on things the culture dictates must stay hidden for the sake of the group's image. And Fatima's comment, it's stark. She said in her culture, mental health just doesn't exist.
Doesn't exist.
And then she added, if it did, half the women would fall down.
Good grief. That implies just this vast hidden reservoir of distress, like a silent crisis underpinning the surface harmony. How does a therapist even start with someone coming from a system built for that level of denial?
It shows the sheer amount of unacknowledged pain that's required to keep up that cultural image of everything being fine. The therapist has to first recognize they're asking the client to break a deeply ingrained cultural rule.
Okay.
For many SOC, the only way they could navigate this was because of the unique boundary the therapy room offered, that professional separation.
So given they were so guarded about anything potentially shaming for the family, what could they talk about in that professional space?
This is where that boundary was key. While they might be very careful about discussing family conflicts or money issues or anything reflecting badly on the group, they often found it easier to talk about things considered really taboo in their home culture.
So things that were intensely personal but didn't necessarily implicate the whole family unit in the same way.
Exactly. Highly private matters like intimacy, relationship difficulties, sexual problems. Several participants mentioned this: Shivani, Natsia, Jasmine, Sabina.
Why was that easier?
Because, as Shivani put it, she knew she was a therapist. The confidentiality was absolute, perceived as totally separate from the community's network of information sharing and potential gossip.
I see. In the collectivist world, everyone's connected, information travels, but the therapist is outside that system.
Precisely. A neutral, non-judgmental space for the private, sometimes shame-filled parts of their lives, a safe container for their emotional self that their culture couldn't provide.
So that boundary creates the space, even if the therapeutic model itself feels foreign. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Let's unpack how power structures then reinforce this need for emotional control. How does power turn assertiveness or even vulnerability into a weakness? This brings us right back to your opening story, his passion, her liability.
Yeah, and the power dynamics they experience at home directly shape how they navigate power everywhere else, including in the therapy room and definitely in the workplace. South Asian culture traditionally has this very clear power hierarchy. Status climbs sharply with age, and men generally hold more decision-making power.
So if you're in a multi-generational home, the youngest woman often ends up at the bottom of a pretty steep, rigid hierarchy.
That's often the case, yes. Least agency, highest expectations for deference, for service, and definitely for emotional control. And this system, being so deeply ingrained, conditions how they expect authority to work.
How they relate to people in charge.
Exactly. So when these women enter Western therapy, they sometimes project those family dynamic onto the therapist.
Okay. They're used to being told what to do by someone higher up.
Right. They've been socialized to expect direction from elders, from authority figures. So some participants expected their therapist to act like an authoritative family member, or as Nadia put it, like a grown-up who would tell me what to do.
That must create some real friction, right? Because they're essentially asking, tell me how to navigate this world that holds me down. But the therapist, coming from a non-directive, individualistic place, is probably saying the answers are inside you.
It can feel like another kind of powerlessness, yes. Being told to self-direct when your whole life has been about following directions. It's like the rules changed without anyone telling you. And this ties directly into that intersection of gender, race, and professional stereotypes, the situation you described at the start. These women often feel intense pressure to fight the negative Western stereotype of South Asian women as, weak, submissive, passive.
That's the double bind again, isn't it? If she shows vulnerability, she confirms a harmful stereotype used against her.
It's absolutely paralyzing. Nadia, the British Pakistani woman we mentioned, felt this deeply. She said, brown women don't have the luxury of being weak. So if she's assertive at work, expresses frustration firmly, she risks being labeled emotional, difficult, just like your colleague was. But if she shows vulnerability, even in the supposedly safe space of therapy, she feels like she's confirming that weak stereotype she's fighting against every single day.
And that explains why she felt angry towards her white female therapist, that feeling of unequal emotional allowance.
Exactly. Nadia reported feeling angry that her white therapist seemed allowed to have a level of fragility, that she, as a saw constantly battling biases, felt she couldn't afford. That anger is a direct reaction to those intersecting power imbalances, race, gender, culture. She feels she carries the weight of representation. Her emotions aren't just hers. They reflect on her whole community. Vulnerability becomes a strategic risk.
So we're seeing the real psychological toll of these stereotypes in professional life. If a South Asian woman shows strong opinions, sets firm boundaries, things often praised in male leaders, it gets filtered through this lens that reads it as problematic emotionality.
Her strength gets consistently recoded as weakness.
And what if she tries leading with empathy, something often talked about as a modern leadership skill?
Then she risks being seen as passive, soft, maybe confirming the submissive stereotype. If she's assertive, she's too emotional. If she's empathetic, she's too weak. The system seems biased to pathologize her behavior either way.
It's a no-win situation. And you mentioned earlier that the power dynamics at home actually dictated how much change they could implement from therapy.
Yes, that was a really clear finding. The strength of those external South Asian power structures directly impacted how much they could translate therapeutic insights into real-world action.
Where was change easier?
It was noticeably easier in contexts outside those entrenched family dynamics, like work.
Yeah.
Fatima, for example, felt she could successfully use what she learned in therapy, setting boundaries, advocating for herself in her job, where she felt she had more personal control over her role.
But trying to apply those same lessons within the family structure was much harder.
Much, much harder. The family hierarchy is reinforced by generations of culture, expectation, obligation. Shivani, for instance, really struggled. She gained profound insights in therapy, but found it incredibly difficult to find the courage to break out of challenging situations within her marriage. She felt powerless against the established structure.
So therapy could help build an inner sense of self, but asserting that self externally could be blocked by the family system.
Yes, it was like, as she described it, being given a lifeline in therapy, only to feel like she was drowning again when she returned to the home environment. It's a stark reminder that individual psychological change can often be constrained or even overridden by structural barriers.
That's such a crucial point. Structure can trump individual awareness or intent, which makes this next part, how they navigated this, really fascinating. They're feeling trapped. Therapy is pushing individual focus. How do they manage to bring that back into their collectivist world without just abandoning everything? Did they just choose autonomy over connection?
No, and that's perhaps the most vital nuance here. They didn't achieve individuation in the classic Western sense, which often implies separating from the group. What they achieved was agency, and they did it through really complex strategic negotiation.
Okay, how did that start?
It started with recognizing their own self-worth, which therapy prompted. By focusing intensely on the I, on their own feelings and needs, they started to challenge that lifelong habit of prioritizing the collective above all else.
They began to see themselves as more than just their roles, daughter, wife, mother, sister-in-law, as having a self separate from others' opinions.
Exactly that. Jasmine had this breakthrough moment, realizing she was not defined by these opinions, meaning the criticisms or expectations from her family or community. This internal shift was huge. And, interestingly, recognizing her own individual self then allowed her to see others, even critical family members, not just as roles, but as individuals with their own flaws and struggles.
That humanizes everyone, presumably making the dynamic less threatening.
Yes, it seems to reduce the emotional charge, seeing the structure and the individuals within it more clearly.
So this awareness becomes the foundation for negotiation. How did that work?
Well, instead of feeling passively trapped by duty or obligation, they started making conscious, intentional choices about how they engage with their roles and responsibilities. They shifted from being purely subject to the system to being active agents within it.
Can you give an example? Because navigating that without being labeled rebellious sounds incredibly difficult, like walking a very fine line.
Rivender is a great example. After therapy, she felt this need to do more than the traditional domestic duties. She felt a desire for something beyond cooking and cleaning and feeding your kids.
Okay.
So she started engaging in service that aligned with her personal interests, like volunteering, spiritual activities. But, and this is key, she made sure she still fulfilled enough of her expected traditional role so that she wouldn't appear rebellious or neglectful in the eyes of the family.
So she diversified her contribution. She found ways to meet her own need for growth while still satisfying the public requirements of her role. It's like strategic compliance almost, managing perceptions carefully.
It's absolute strategic. It involves choosing battles, deciding when to use her voice, and when to pursue her goals more quietly. Khadija talked about consciously choosing to mute herself sometimes. She felt, it doesn't take anything away from me, even though it's not fair.
That's fascinating. It's not passive silence. It's a deliberate choice to preserve harmony or achieve a different goal while maintaining her internal sense of self, strength through selective engagement.
Exactly. And this internal struggle, navigating these two worlds, often leads to what researchers call a torn cultural identity, especially for women born and raised here in the UK.
Right, feeling pulled in two directions. How did this negotiation process help with that?
For many UK-born participants, they initially felt really conflicted. They described having split identities, one for home, one for the outside world. Therapy helped them see this binary wasn't necessary. As Khadija put it, they realized they could pick and choose the bits that you want from both cultures.
Creating a hybrid identity.
Yes, moving towards embracing an integrated, self-defined identity, often using terms like British Asian. This felt like a huge act of self-determination, validating their complex reality.
Taking ownership of the complexity.
And once they started forming this integrated sense of self, they really needed validation for it from others. This led to what the research called an urgent pursuit of a similar tribe. They actively sought out other people who got it, who understood the nuances of living between these two cultural systems.
Finding community must have been incredibly validating after feeling so alone in that struggle.
It was crucial. Jasmine, Khadija, Sabina, Deblene, they all talked about needing that peer support. It confirmed their negotiated identity wasn't just wrong or confused, but a shared reality. Khadija described the relief of realizing practically every Asian girl she knew was having some sort of struggle, but as soon as you give them one bean, they were like, yay, yay, me too.
Ah, that moment of shared recognition,
Yeah.
turning private shame into a collective experience.
Exactly. It made negotiating their identity feel less like a solitary burden and more like a shared, powerful asset.
Okay, this is where it gets really powerful, I think. Because their journey didn't just stop at personal change or finding peers, it actually extended outwards. The self-awareness they gained didn't just change them, it turned them into advocates against the very systems that had constrained them.
Yes, that's a really significant outcome. The positive experience of therapy gaining self-awareness, feeling liberated from that constant suppression, it sparked this desire in many of them to help others find the same relief. Once they felt it had benefited them, they became, as the research puts it, active torchbearers for mental health awareness in their communities.
And this wasn't just passive encouragement, you said, it was strategic.
Definitely strategic. We talked about how hard it is to promote something seen as self-indulgent in a collectivist culture with high stigma, so they had to be clever about it.
How did they approach that? How do you advocate within your own family?
Nazi's approach was brilliant. She was trying to convince her brother, who was going through a tough time with loss, to get help. She didn't use emotional appeals, she used logic.
Okay.
She asked him, essentially, if a friend told you they were going through all this, wouldn't you tell them they needed professional help? She framed it objectively, about helping someone else. His response, yeah, it makes sense.
That's genius. She completely reframed it, took the personal shame out by making it about giving good advice to a hypothetical other. She bypassed the stigma using logic.
Exactly. She used her therapeutic learning as a tool for advocacy within her own cultural context. She applied a therapeutic mindset strategically. Jasmine's advocacy also had a domino effect in her family, slowly normalizing talking about difficult feelings. And Fatima, feeling so isolated when she first sought help, planned to start some kind of blog to connect with others saw.
Wow, Fatima's blog idea that's taking personal vulnerability and turning it directly into community action and support, reaching out to the very community she felt alone in.
Precisely. This proactive stance, trying to break down those barriers for others, really shows a psychological shift. They went from fearing the weak stereotype to using their hard-won self-awareness as a tool for empowering their community.
Which brings us to a crucial takeaway, doesn't it? One that challenges the standard Western psychological approach itself.
It really does. The core critique emerging from these experiences fundamentally questions the Eurocentric bias in a lot of psychology. The assumption that individuation, meaning separation from the collective, is the ultimate universal goal of mental health.
Because for these women, pushing for that kind of separation could be incredibly damaging.
It could risk profound social and cultural isolation. It might mean severing the very family and community ties that form their main support system, even if those ties are also sources of stress.
So the woman who manages to hold on to her traditional connections while also carving out space for her individual needs and voice, she's the one demonstrating real strength and empowerment in this context.
Her strength lies in managing that complexity, not in simplifying her life by choosing one world over the other.
The goal isn't assimilation into a purely Western, individualistic way of being.
Not at all. The focus should be on supporting their ability to choose, to negotiate, helping them turn that emotional regulation skill, often learned through painful suppression, into a conscious strategic asset.
So this whole deep dive is really a call for everyone, therapists, managers, colleagues, to look critically at our own biases, isn't it?
Absolutely. We need to be really cautious about automatically labeling interdependence as weakness or oppression, just because it doesn't fit the Western go-it-alone narrative. The ability these women demonstrate in navigating complexity, honoring the collective, while asserting individual agency, that's an incredible form of emotional intelligence. That's a true asset in any context.
That brings us right back to the beginning, but with a much richer understanding. Let's try and summarize the core findings, those key aha moments for you listening. First, it's crystal clear. How emotions are expressed and perceived depends entirely on context and power. It's not about inherent gender traits. His outburst was passion because it fit a powerful male stereotype. Her controlled response was a liability because it challenged stereotypes about women, particularly Sabu being passive or fragile.
Yeah, spot on. Second, we saw that the incredible strength and agency shown by these South Asian women wasn't about rejecting their culture. It was about strategic negotiation. They consciously worked to integrate their individual needs and self-focus within their collectivist roles, showing that resilience absolutely thrives within interdependence, not just outside it.
Right. Thirdly, the process of therapy, even with its cultural clashes, gave these women the language and self-awareness they needed to navigate incredibly complex power structures, from rigid family hierarchies to corporate environments where they feared being labeled weak. They learned to choose when to advocate and when to strategically mute themselves, transforming what might have been forced silence into a conscious, powerful choice. Emotional regulation became a strategic tool.
And finally, the way we interpret emotion, labeling it passion or vulnerability, strength or weakness, that's an invisible power dynamic we bring into every room, every conversation. What these women's experiences teach us so powerfully is that change, growth, identity, it's rarely a simple choice between culture A or culture B. It's a complex, ongoing, deliberate negotiation. The most valuable skill we can all cultivate, really, is the self-awareness to see these invisible power dynamics at play, whether they show up as workplace stereotypes or deep cultural expectations. And then with that awareness, we can decide intentionally how we want to negotiate our own emotional space, express ourselves, and maybe even assert our own power.
That awareness really does change the lens, doesn't it? It allows us to see someone's perceived emotionality not as a simple liability, but potentially as evidence of profound strategic strength, honed by navigating multiple, often conflicting worlds.